Well, let me ask you a question. What do you think, or what kind of people do you think make the biggest impact on the world? Today's lesson is entitled Going About Teaching, and we want to look at, to start with, those who make the biggest impact on our world. Is it the engineers who build rockets to launch people into space? Or how about the doctors who deliver us and bring us into the world? Or maybe it's the politicians who work for better policies for their constituents. And I can't deny that all of these people have an impact to some degree on our lives. But when do you ever think about the engineer that made the toaster that sits in your kitchen? Or after the doctor delivers you into the world, has probably has not had any impact on how you came out or what you became in life. And honestly, with politicians, we can just move on from there, right? Each of these people do to some extent impact our lives. But if I were to go around the room today and survey people and ask you, who would be in the top 2 or 3 people that have influenced you to become the person that you are? And I think that most of you, somewhere in those top 2 or 3 people, would name at some point a person that inspired you, a person that challenged you, a person that encouraged you. And chances are one of those people is going to be a teacher. Teachers impact lives. And it's interesting to me that when Jesus went about, which we talked about just a week ago, Jesus went about teaching. He went about teaching and healing all manner of sickness and delivering those oppressed by the devil. Remember this? Acts chapter 10, verse 38. Should have put that on the screen, but I didn't. We talked about that. Well, how did he go about doing it? Well, part of what he did when he went around, we like to think about, well, he made the lame to walk, and he made the blind to see, and he raised the dead. He did all those things, and wow, what spectacular things that Jesus did when he walked the earth to prove that he was the Son of God. But in a majority of those passages, right alongside, you're going to find the word teaching. Look at Matthew 4:23, and Jesus went about all Galilee, teaching in the synagogues, preaching the kingdom, the gospel of the kingdom, healing all manner of sickness and all manner of disease among the people. You go over just a few more pages in Matthew chapter 9 and verse 35, and Jesus went about all the cities and villages, teaching in the synagogues and preaching the gospel of the kingdom and healing every sickness and every disease among the people. And there's another reference, Mark chapter 6, from which Josh read earlier in the service, and he went around about the villages teaching. So Jesus made a habit when he was going, not just of healing, but also of teaching and speaking to people. Quite frankly, I think Jesus was first a teacher and then a healer because the majority of his time he spent teaching. Healing was just on the side. In fact, we only have about 35 recorded miracles of Jesus in the entire New Testament. I mentioned that a week ago. He did other things, in fact, so many on some nights that he healed all manner, or many who came to him, so we don't know the full. But if we isolate the different miracles, there's only 35. But everywhere Jesus was teaching. And if you want to impact the world for Jesus, I think teaching needs to be part of that. Let me show you how teaching could really be part of your ministry of having a greater impact, so that you're going about like Jesus, not just going about life, but going about doing good. And how can I do it? Do good by going about teaching. Number one, let's talk about how much good Jesus did by teaching. Jesus, number one, did good by teaching. Even as the fame grew over all the miracles he was doing, Jesus kept teaching. He didn't stop teaching for the sake of miracles. Here's another passage in Mark's Gospel, chapter 6, verse 2. When the Sabbath day was come, he began to teach in the synagogue, and many hearing him were astonished, saying, "From whence hath this man these things?" Well, this raises some additional questions in my mind that I'd like to explore with you. If Jesus is a good teacher, and he went about what did he teach about? What was on his mind? Well, this is very interesting. If you follow the word teach through the Gospels, you'll find that he taught on certain things. Here's one example. This from Mark's Gospel, things about God. In Mark chapter 12, verse 14, "And when they were come, they say unto him, Master, we know that thou art true, And you care for no man, for thou regardest not the person of men, but teachest the way of God in truth. Is it lawful to give tribute to Caesar or not? I want you to notice that phrase in the middle, for thou regardest not the person of men, but teachest the way of God in truth. Jesus taught about God, or how to get to God, or how to know God. He had a lot to say about God in the Sermon on the Mount. We don't have, the purpose of the message is not to outline everything that he taught, but the Sermon on the Mount is full of the law of God and how we as people can meet God's expectations with regard to the law. And Jesus taught it's a lot more difficult than you think it is to follow God the way he intended you to follow. But as he taught, people were astonished at what he said because he was teaching as one who had authority and not as a scribes. Matthew chapter 7 and verse 23 or 29 says that. When Jesus taught about God, he did that largely in the Sermon on the Mount, but he also taught about his coming death. And I want you to see this in Mark chapter 8 verse 31. And he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things, be rejected of the elders and the chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. Jesus was teaching his disciples about what was going to happen to him when he went up to Jerusalem. And he said, I want you to know they're going to get me, chief priests, scribes. I'm going to be killed. And I'm going to rise again the third day. Why am I setting all this up like this? You know what some of you do? When you teach, when you talk to people, you can tell them about God. When you talk to people, you can talk to them about Jesus' death and what it means. Jesus was doing the same thing when he walked the earth. He was teaching people about God and his death. Is that all his teaching? Hardly. We have the parables, and we have a bunch of those. There's like 26, 29 parables, something like that in the New Testament. So if you want to know all of Jesus' teaching ministry, you've got to study the Gospels. But some of the key themes that he was laying out had to do with what's God like and what's my coming death about. So if you want to do good as a teacher, that's content. That's some of the things that we should be talking about. The second question that comes to mind is Jesus' teaching. I know a little bit more about the content. We didn't cover it comprehensively. We've outlined a couple things that he talked about. But the second question is, where did he do his teaching? Where was he teaching? And this is easy because already I've quoted Matthew chapter 4, verse 23 and Matthew 9, 35. And he was teaching where? In the synagogues and in the temple. So Jesus was teaching in the synagogue. What's a synagogue? You know, most of us are familiar with those are Jewish houses of worship. But did you know that they came into being about the 6th century BC when the temple was destroyed in Jerusalem and the Jews could no longer worship at the temple? They were exiled into Babylon, and while in exile, they wanted to meet together and to continue their worship of the Lord and to train their children to follow the Lord. So they have these services started in which they would meet as a group and they would read the law and somebody would discuss it or try to explain it. And that was a synagogue service. Well, that was still going on in Jesus' day. It's still going on in this day. But in Jesus' day, he met in the synagogues, which means he went on the Sabbath to what would have been a Jewish church. In fact, it's not a church. I mean, the synagogue is not a church, but largely what we do today in our congregational meetings in this church follow the synagogue kind of service. We meet together, we read from God's law or a portion of the Bible, and we explain it. That's what I'm doing right now. Well, at least that's what I'm trying to do right now, is explain what it means. And so there's a lot of similarity. It's not exact. There's differences in beliefs and philosophies, but we follow congregational worship in our church follows a synagogue style. So Jesus taught in the synagogues, and we also know on occasion he taught in the temple. In fact, you might recall in Luke chapter 2, when he was just 12 years old, Jesus went down to the temple with his family, and his family couldn't find him for 3 days. And he was in there discussing with the leaders and asking them questions. So even at 12 years old, he was doing some teaching in the temple. Now, why is that important? Segue to real life. You know what? What's one of the best places that you and I can teach? Right in the house of the Lord when God's people meet together. We need teachers to do that. People to explain the Bible. And not just on this level, but we need teachers to explain it to the children. And those to explain it on a level for teenagers. And those who can explain it on a level for adults. And that's where teaching needs to begin. Jesus taught in places where God's people met. We ought to do the same. Teach where God's people are assembled. Help those who are seeking. Explain truth to simple-minded people. Start at your own church. Which really leads me to this point right now. And the point is, we need teachers in this ministry. We're always struggling to grab one teacher to fill this class, and when that teacher is absent, we have to pull another one from this over here and put in there, and it's a constant shuffling. But what if we had like a teacher and a co-teacher for every class, and that way when one stepped out, there was always somebody to step in? Well, how's that going to happen? We need more teachers. We need people that see this, not as just, oh, groan, here comes pastor, he's going to ask me to do this again. And I don't want to do. But we need to see our lives as not just going about, but we need to see them going about doing good and accomplishing something for the kingdom of God. And if I'm going to do that, I got to be intentional about it. Is it going to happen by mistake? I'll say more about teaching in the church later in the service today. Let's go to the next one. He didn't only preach in synagogues and the temple. He also went into their villages and in the countryside. Most of you are familiar with the Sermon on the Mount. In Matthew chapter 5, verse number 1, and he went up into a mountain, and he sat down and he taught them, saying, that's where we get the Sermon on the Mount. He was up in a mount and he taught them. So that's the sermon. And it's 3 chapters long. It's in the Gospel of Matthew, Matthew 5, 6, and 7. But also the verse I read earlier in the service, Mark 6, verse 6, says he went around about all the villages or towns, and he was teaching when he went there. And then it wasn't just there. He would also go down by the seaside. Do you remember the times that he would get up into the bow of a boat and stand, and the people would come down by the seashore, and he taught them out of a boat. He began again to teach by the seaside. There was gathered unto him a great multitude, said he entered into a ship, and he sat in the sea. Actually, he sat in the boat that was in the sea. A little bit of left out there. And the whole multitude was by the sea on the land. So, now why is this important? Why is he teaching in towns and countryside and open air meetings? Why does that matter? Because all the teaching that happens doesn't happen at church. There's a lot of teaching that goes on in other places and other spaces. And we need to think about our ministry. It's not just teaching the little kids here or the teenagers or having an adult service, but how can I take what I know about God out into the villages and countryside, and if I happen to go down by the sea, maybe anybody going to San Diego, that would apply, right? Or wherever you happen to be going, that I'm taking what I know about God and I know about Jesus' death, and I'm taking it wherever I happen to be. Jesus was out with the people. He was visiting where they were. And some of you are thinking, but I am not a teacher. That is not me. Rabbi and pastor, teacher and scholar, they don't fit in the same sentence. But even if you don't have that title, everybody in this room does teach. Do you know that? You do. You teach right now about Christianity by how you practice it and live it out. Your neighbors are watching. Your family is watching how you practice Christianity. And even if you don't speak a word, you are teaching something by the way you live. We are all teachers. Do you get the point? Wherever we are. In your workplace, everybody's watching you, especially if you make it known that you're a Christian. They're going to say, wonder how a Christian acts. I've never seen one of these guys before. How do they act? And so you are teaching whether you know it or not. You all have connections with people I will never meet. They sit in your classes. They sit in your work, in your break room at work. You stand next to them at a counter when you're serving customers. You know them. I will never know them. I think as Christians, we need to get more intentional. More intentional when we're out and about like Jesus was. Wonder if this person, I think that's the next bullet. Do you ever wonder, does this person know God? Do they really know God? You ever think about that? As a Christian, that's the way I should be thinking. I should be intentional. I wonder if this person even knows about God. Next, wonder if they've ever heard about Jesus' death. Wonder if they ever know anything about, well, maybe they've heard it, but do they know the reason for it? A lot of people have heard about Jesus. They've seen The Passion of the Christ, the movie that came out about 20 years ago. They know about that. They've seen the movie, but why did he have to die? The movie doesn't tell us. All right? I wonder, too, if I might have the opportunity, if God might want me to be introducing them to Jesus. I cannot expect that everybody will make it inside these four walls to hear about Jesus. I mean, I hope they come. We invite them to come. We send out mailings every month. We're visiting in the neighborhoods and trying to share Christ. We're doing what we can. Could we do more? Yeah, probably, but we need a bigger team to do that. But yeah, we're going. But you go every week. You're going about. You're moving among these people. You're seeing them in the store. You are visiting with them in your neighborhood. Do you ever wonder? Wonder if they know the Lord. Wonder if God would want me to introduce them. But I don't know what to say. If I start a conversation, I'm going to get in over my head like really fast because I don't know as much as you know, and I'm going to really have trouble. And so I want to tell you something that was told to me by my mentor years ago. This is something that has stuck with me up until the present day. And maybe for good or bad, you figure it out. You'll figure it out in just a moment. But my first 3 years of ministry, public ministry, I was an intern under another pastor. His picture's going to come up on the screen. He's preached here. His name is John Mincy. And I worked in Antioch, California, in my first ministry for 3 years. He paid me by making me teach. He didn't make me, asked me to teach in the Christian school. They had a Christian day school. And then for about half my time. And then the rest of the time he let me do ministry things, and I took some things off his plate. He was a solo pastor like myself at the time, so he was happy to have somebody else to do some of the administrative things to take that off his plate, and I was happy to help. But one of the things he did the first year I was there, we met once a week for an hour, and he taught me a pastoral studies class, different subjects of pastoral ministry, trying to prepare me for what was ahead. And he expected me at some point to pastor church. He was hoping somebody would take me. So you were desperate. I get it. But anyway, you took me. But one of the lessons that he taught me, he said, Mike, just preach what you know. Preach what you know. Well, isn't that might sound like, that's like really stupid. That's so simple that's almost dumb. But you know, in my ministry, I have really worked hard just to preach simple things that I know. Are there smarter pastors out there in the country? Yeah, they could probably walk circles around me with their knowledge and degrees and understanding. But I'd just rather relate to the people and preach what I know. That's kind of been my ministry philosophy. And you're probably still here because you appreciate that. What good is it just to be able to dissect all these different kind of Greek things and not be able to relate to people where they are? And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with dissecting Greek. I do that from time to time. But I just try to preach what I know. Here's a segue to what we're talking about. You think, man, I've got to know everything if I start talking about it, and you don't have to know everything. Just say what you know. Well, Pastor, what if they ask me something I don't know? Answer. I don't know the answer to that. But I'll ask my pastor and get back to you. Well, what if they have an objection I'm not really prepared to handle? You say, I've not heard that before, but I can work on an answer for you. And in the meantime, here's a tract. Do I have one in my pocket? I usually do. Oh, I don't right now. I'll take a tract and say, hey, I'll work on the question. Here's something for you to read, and I'll get back to you. Now what you've done is you've given some more information, maybe more than you're prepared to share, and the conversation continues. I'd like to say to you that one of the best things we could do as Christians when it comes to teaching, just introduce a subject. Sometimes people say, I'm not interested in talking about that. They'll go right off to some other thing. And that's fine, they're not open. But if you introduce a subject, you start a conversation that you could be used of God to teach somebody a little bit about God or a little bit about Jesus' death. We would do a whole lot more good if we didn't just simply go about, but we went about doing some teaching along the way. Have you talked to anybody this week about Jesus? Point number 2, you can do good by teaching. You can do more good by teaching. So secondly, I'd like you to consider some ways. We've looked at how Jesus went about teaching. I'm going to talk about how you can be a better teacher. Now, if you put those two things together, you and a teacher, you're probably, again, having a difficulty putting that in the same sentence, because most of us think when it comes to teaching, we think of what I'm doing. All right, we're in a room, there's a bunch of students, there's maybe a microphone and some PowerPoints and a lectern, and somebody is waxing eloquent about teaching. And that is a Western form of teaching. It isn't the only way that teaching is done. There are other ways to teach. Let me give you some examples of what I'm talking about when it comes to teaching. You ever have to go in a room and explain to a kid how to tie his shoes? Or why we're going to wear this to church today and not the other thing that you had on? That's teaching. And how about when you put that 15 and a half or 16-year-old behind the wheel of your automobile that you've spent thousands of dollars on, and you have to explain to them before they turn it on where the brake is and what it does and how important that is to the lives of both people in the car? You're doing teaching. Do you understand what I'm saying? We all are teaching a whole lot more. Hey, what happens? What are you doing when you make a social media post about something that you read or something that you think deserves more attention? You're trying to teach your network of people something that you think is important. Or how about when somebody stops by your house or pulls up next to your car and they ask you, do you know where such and such is? I've been going in circles for the last 10 minutes, and you give directions. You're teaching. So if you're open to God using you, you'll have opportunities along the way to do some teaching. There's hidden potential in all of us to teach. Let me share some ways the New Testament tells us that we could be better teachers. I've already suggested some. Here's some others. Letter A, when you sing, you teach. When you sing, you teach. Colossians chapter 3, verse 16, let the word of Christ dwell in you richly in all wisdom, teaching and admonishing one another in psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, singing with grace in your hearts to the Lord. In the middle, it says teaching and admonishing one another in psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. When I lift up my voice, it says something about what I believe about God. It's a message to others, not just that I believe, but how intensely I believe. If I'm just mumbling up the words, just barely opening my lips, then people are going to wonder about your kind of faith. But I don't really know how to sing, and I get that. We're actually working on a program here to better equip you to sing. In fact, we've just been working to try to take what we believe are about 4 months of our best songs, putting them in a package, and we're hoping then to repeat them until we learn them as a group, so we're not always doing new songs. It's a new philosophy. So if you start seeing some songs repeated, it's because we're trying to adapt this a little bit so that you get better acquainted with the songs. Because when you sing, you teach. It says something about your faith. We want you to learn the songs, not just so you can sing them well here, but there's an aspect of faith when you walk away from this place, that music, that melody brings words back to your mind the same way commercials do. And when you get the melodies in your head, you'll remember the words and you live out your faith that way. When you sing, you teach. Here's another one we see in the New Testament. When you mentor, you teach. When you mentor, you teach. Titus chapter 2, verse 3 says, the aged women likewise, that they be in behaviors becometh holiness, not false accusers, not given to much wine, teachers of good things. Why are the aged women to be teachers of good things? Verse 4, that they may teach the young women to be sober, to love their husbands, to love their children. So Paul's explaining to Titus, you need to get the older women involved in teaching the younger women how to be good women, good wives, and good mothers at home. And on top of that, it's not just the women that need to mentor younger ladies. The whole church is supposed to be doing this. Let's go to the next slide. 2 Timothy 2, verse 2 says, all the things that thou hast heard of me among many witnesses, the same commit thou to faithful men who shall be able to teach others also. So I am supposed to take in teaching, then I'm supposed to be able to give that out to others, so I'm mentoring others into ministry. Let's step out of the passage for a moment and just talk about Jesus again. How long was Jesus on the earth? About 33 years. How long was his ministry? About 3 years. And how much time did he spend with the crowds? He did preach and teach to the crowds, but he spent the majority of his time with 12 men. And he really just poured his life into 12 men over and over, day after day. And what I mean by that is what he ate, they ate. Where he slept, they slept. What he experienced, they experienced. This is a different kind of teaching. It's more in the East than it is in the West, but you actually went and lived with your teacher. In fact, Martin Luther, when he was teaching pastors in Germany, he had some of them live in the house with he and his wife, Catherine, so that they could learn what it was like to have a Christian home and that he could develop them even further than he could in a classroom. And this is what Jesus, he's mentoring these men. And we need to think about our ministry, I think, as a church family, more like this. Do we need to have times of teaching like this? I think it's beneficial and I think it's helpful. Do we need to have classes for different ages? Yeah, I agree. But sometimes we get kind of isolated into thinking that all the teaching is going to happen in this room or it's going to happen with this person at this hour. And really we need to think about wherever I'm mingling with people, I have the opportunity to be teaching them and mentoring them to follow Christ. What if you befriended a new member or a newer attender in this church and said, let's meet together this week and let's talk a little bit about about the Lord and what it means to follow him. Some of you have been in this church for 10 years or more. You probably know far more than you give yourselves credit for. And you could take somebody under your wing and bring them along spiritually. I would love to do this if I could with every person in the room, but it's not enough of me to go around. I am just one. I don't currently have it going on, but I try to have somebody in my life that I'm working on discipling and helping along all the time. It doesn't always happen. Some people, because of our schedules, we can't get together, or because of mine, I have to take a break. But what if you thought about that? I mean, what if you carved out another 35, maybe 60 minutes of your week, and you met with somebody and you talked about spiritual things? Could you do that? I'd really like us to develop a culture where we're actually trying to disciple one another. Some of you have known the Lord more years than I've been alive. And you could be teaching and training others. What if you took a teenager under your wing and agreed to meet with them for a burger? And then as part of that, you just taught them some lessons that you've learned about life. I mean, maybe right now that sounds intimidating. But if you just took about 10 minutes and wrote down some of the key things that you've learned, like how to pray, how you read the Bible and get anything out of it, why is it important to give at church and how much should we give at church, how can I live in a godly way when I'm being bombarded by godless words and godless stories, and you just take a couple bullets. I actually did this with my teenagers. I don't know that they actually knew this, but with some of them, I don't know that I did this but with some of them, I wanted to talk about certain topics. So I made a little list and I tucked it in my pocket. Whenever we were alone in the car, the two of us, I'd bring up one of those topics and say, let's talk about it. Because I was trying to develop and encourage and mentor my boys. Have I done it perfectly? No, I'm not trying to say that. I'm just saying that, you know what I wrote down on that list? We talked about women, teenage boys. We talked about wealth. All right? We talked about church, ministry, and your involvement in it. I just had topics like that. You could do the same kinds of thing, just write a few topics down, and share what you know or what God has taught you on those topics with someone else. Be very helpful. But Pastor, I need more than that because I'm really not as equipped in the Word, and I get that. So I want to show you, what if you took a book and met with somebody once a week? We have something here that we tried to introduce 5 years ago. 5 years ago this year, what was going on? I didn't introduce it at a good time, and I couldn't have known. We started January on this, and then COVID hit, and we had to park on it for a while. But this little booklet has 12 topics in it, and it has all the verses written out, and you could just meet with somebody. And we have lots of these copies that we got 5 years ago, didn't get to use because COVID got in the way, and we weren't supposed to be meeting with people. And so it got tabled. But there's a lesson on salvation, eternal security, prayer, temptation, the local church, what it means to evangelize, what stewardship is, basic topics, and it's all listed out for you. And it's not necessary that you go through necessarily all of the topics, but pick the ones that are needed for the person that you're trying to disciple. And these are available, they're for free. And if you'd like to meet with somebody to do that, we want to help that. We want to encourage that to happen. Because we want you to think about your life, not just going about, but going about doing good. And one of the ways you can do good is to take someone under your wing and teach them. This is the way Jesus did ministry. It wasn't just in public settings. He took the disciples apart for a little while and ministered to them. This is teaching in the raw. It's life-touching life, and I think it's critical if we're going to make disciples. We think if I put a teenager in a class and just talk to them, they're going to get it. No, they probably need somebody that will live life next to them and help them along and talk to them about difficulties they're going to go through. And you can do that. You could take another member, meet for coffee in the morning, maybe tea in the afternoon, and you could walk through a page or two of this book. And I would encourage you, or another book that would be helpful. All right, giving you some ideas. I'm almost at the end. Is everybody doing okay? All right. When you sing, you teach. When you mentor, you teach. And when you answer, you teach. What do you mean answer? Well, 1 Peter 3, verse 15 says, "But sanctify the Lord God in your hearts. Be ready always to give an answer to every man that asketh you a reason of the hope that is in you, with meekness and fear." Peter was teaching his churches that he was writing to, you need to be ready all the time to give an answer to every man the hope that lies in you. Because you never know when somebody's going to ask you a question, and you might be able to introduce them to the Lord or to what the Lord's death means. So you need to be ready with answers. This is the encouragement of the text. You may have missed it, but people are looking for answers. What do you do? Israel, just this week, struck Hamas in Qatar, or Qatar, however you say it. Man, I heard that. I'm like, oh dear, what is going to happen next? All right? Scary. We live in... Well, what if somebody brings that up? Are you prepared with an answer about your hope in Christ? And no matter what happens in the Middle East, you're ready to meet the Lord. There are segues that you go immediately to the gospel with from that. We already talked about the assassination in the service today, but that would be another segue to know that no matter what happens, the moment you pass from this life, you're in the presence of the Lord. And 2 Corinthians 5, verse 8 says, to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. And so if you're ready with an answer, you can share your hope about Christ. Or how about when your coworker tells you he comes to work and he says his wife just walked out this weekend? What kind of hope can you give? If you're ready with an answer, you can give him some hope and you can teach. Or what if you receive news that a nephew or a niece at another state takes their own life? There are constant problems in culture and family that are opportunities for us to introduce Jesus. And if we're intentional, if we're thinking about it, we can teach into their lives some truth about God. They may not take a whole lot, and that's okay. You don't have to preach a sermon. You might just need to give a little seed thought, a little verse, John 3:16, or a verse about hope. Like I just shared from 2 Corinthians 5, verse 8, to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. So teaching, though, doesn't happen unless you're intentional. And teaching doesn't always just happen in the classroom. Teaching happens in the break room. It happens in the front seat of a pickup. It happens at the coffee shop or when you're walking with a friend. If you and I saw ourselves as teachers, we could make a bigger impact on our world for Jesus Christ. We don't know everything, but all of you know something about God, and we need to go make it known. So if you want to impact your world for Jesus, maybe you should go about teaching. Make an impact on your world. Do something. Go teach. Now, I thought of how I might end the message, and I've decided I'm just going to share the impact another teacher has made on my life. And I bet you could share your own stories, and I didn't prep you ahead to be ready with one, so I'll tell you about mine. So I was in high school, and when I was in high school, actually before I was in high school when I was 10, my dad was involved in a very serious accident that really marginalized his influence on my life. And for whatever, that was God's plan for me. So really felt in my teenage years more influenced by my mother than my father, just because my father was not around. He's still living, he's doing fine today, but he was in a serious accident that debilitated him. That's the word I'm looking for. Debilitated him for about 10, 12 years. Just slept a lot, had epilepsy, etc. So other people stood in the place. And I had great admiration. I want to tell you about one of my favorite teachers of all of my years, and his name is Tim Oberman. His picture's coming up right now. It's his wife, Becky, behind. In fact, I wanted to get a picture. I couldn't find one, so I called him last night and had him send me one. It's awesome what you can do with technology. So I got to chat with him for about 40 minutes last night, enjoy this man immensely. He's still a personal friend. In fact, had my family visit with him on a recent trip last summer when we were through his area. So, Tim Oberman. So he was my high school English, Spanish, history, and sometimes Bible teacher. So he would, and I love this man because he really engaged his subjects. He was very thorough. He was excellent. He sought to be accurate and on point. And I just overall felt like he was a good teacher. He communicated well. And I had great respect for him that way. But it wasn't primarily the way he taught his subjects. It's the way he spent time with his kids outside the classroom. So it wasn't what he did publicly like this so much as what he did side by side when I needed somebody. And I did need somebody. I'm like every other person. I have problems. And I had problems when I was a teenager and things I wanted to talk about. And I remember meeting him one time, and we went up to the Slate Rocks. I forget now, that was a little nickname for the place, but it overlooks the railroad tracks and the river in my town. And we just sat there on the cliffs overlooking the railroad track and the river, and we had a conversation about something that was on my heart. And he shared things that have just stuck in my mind till this present day. So I just love this man immensely for how he invested in me all through the years. In fact, there's so much investment in my life that when I brought Christina back to see my family for the first time, I was real excited about her and wanted to show my girl off to my family. And of course, I wanted her to see my immediate family, my parents and siblings. But the next thought we made is like, we got to go over and see Tim Oberman. So she's known him for a bunch of years. In fact, when I was a freshman in college, I think he just thought I was too academic, such a bookworm, that he was getting concerned about me and my future. So he bought me a historical romance novel. No, this is a true story. I think the title was Secrets of the Rose by Michael Phillips. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that title or not. It's not that important. But he just wanted me to read a story that was about history, about the time of the Nazis, but it was also had a love interest. I can't even tell you what, other than that, I don't remember the book. But about 3/4 of the way through the book, there was a $10 bill in the back and a little note that said, this is the money to buy the next one in the series. So I think it was a 3 or 4 volume series. So I did end up, I read the whole series, whatever it was. And I don't know that I needed that necessarily to ignite my romantic flame, but he did have a part in that. That's just a humorous little story for her. But you know what? Just always appreciate this guy because it wasn't just about the classroom and about getting through a lesson. He really invested in me personally. You have people like that in your life, people that have inspired you. They may not have worn the name teacher, but they've helped you along spiritually. Might have been a pastor, might have been a Christian friend, an older woman in the church. And I just want to encourage you, find someone like that you can do the same thing to. Find someone younger that you could do the same thing that was done to you. Mentor somebody else. Bring someone along. Find a way to go about doing good and go about and teach somebody to move forward for Jesus Christ. Every Christian ought to live this way. Father in heaven, thank you for the word, how you've spoken to our hearts.